The many questions I actually want to pose, beg your pardon, to the opposition members. The Green member was talking about Māoridom and the suffering that happens therein by virtue of association with gangs. Māori by population make up 1 million people in New Zealand. 1 million. I've just Googled the stats. So essentially just close to 1/5. By virtue of the gang numbers, as quickly as I could find it on dear old Google, there's 5,000 of those that are Māori and disproportionately Māori women, not Māori men. 53% Māori men are in prison, 67% of those that are in prison, beg your pardon, are Māori men, 67% of women. 1 million New Zealanders that happen to be Māori are not in prison. I think we're having an ideological conversation here today about breaking the law, intimidating law-abiding New Zealanders who just want to go about their daily lives. Now, Madam Speaker, I live in Northland, quite often venture into the far north. Awesome place. Spend a bit of time in Kaikoui. Certain times of the day, that's a pretty scary proposition for certain people, because there is a significant gang presence. Please, I ask this House to indulge in common sense. For a lot of New Zealanders, that is frightening. By virtue of the nature of being in gang, we can have a wider conversation about the societal drivers of young Māori men disproportionately drawing down on wanting to be in a gang. We understand what they are. The member rightly pointed out, poor employment, domestic violence, perpetrated often against them. But why are we not talking about the victims of crime? That so often, to the member's remarks about Māori and Māoridom, if I pronounce it correctly, the victims are disproportionately Māori. Yeah. So go to some of our poorest regions in New Zealand, who have the very issues that the member raised: poor employment, job losses, fractured employment at the very best, a lot of issues with domestic violence, a lot of issues with poor policing by virtue of resources. The myriad of reasons that we find ourselves in societal decline in these areas where gangs have run amok. I don't think, as we pass this legislation into law, that anyone worth their salt can genuinely come into this House and say that we don't have a gang problem. We've got a gang problem. We've got a problem with some of our young people who happen to be Māori, choosing that as a pathway to a future. That is a nonsense. I don't pick winners and losers based on race, I pick people. They either want to be in there or they don't. They break the law or they don't. We have a prison system that reconciles those that have broken the law and those that haven't. Yes, the member makes some very salient remarks about the societal drivers of gang membership and joining them, but let's be real here. There's 1 million Māori people and overwhelmingly they're not in gangs. They're bloody good people going about their lives, adding to New Zealand society, the tax take, the overall well-being of New Zealand as a whole. They're not gang members, they're not out intimidating people on motorbikes, flipping the bird, ultimately making people's life pretty miserable. There's a better opportunity and it is employment. Let's find these people's jobs. Let's get our young Māori men and women in schools. Keep them in schools. We can have a wider conversation around that. But this bill to do with gangs is addressing the core drivers of gang intimidation. And I think, at risk of over-litigating the point, this bill is addressing that runaway problem and the victims of crime and the victims and the dear old New Zealander that just wants to go about their daily lives without being intimidated. And that includes the million Māori people that aren't part of any sort of gang affiliation. Thank you, Madam Chair.